You're not sitting in a lecture room bored stiff, right? You make it what you want to be. With me, it's going to be fun, culturally interesting, and you get a good grasp of the reality of Cuban, Cuban life. So I'll get you together with Alex and you'll learn about baseball. You'll meet with my pal Lazaro, who, by the way, in July had a show here in Los Angeles, now a renowned artist. But you meet with Lazaro and you'll just be blown away by his accomplishment as an artist. But you also learn about how did he learn, what's the state involvement in training and teaching artists. Again, just like health. You want to be a doctor, what Rosalia forgot to tell you, you will be trained for free. You want a PhD, you will be trained for free and get a stipend so that you don't have to wait tables, right? Pretty good system as far as I'm concerned. And you can maybe have an experience with the Santeria group, all right? That's always very popular with groups. Santeria being the most important religion. And of course, you come with me on my motorcycle tours. You're going to get together with my pal Luis, one of the Harleystas, as they're called, Harley Davidson owners who has 13 old Harleys. Or I'll take you to meet Che Guevara's son, Ernesto. Here he is with his 1948 Harley Davidson. I have to say, on my text this morning, I get a message from his wife, Maria, saying, Chris, when are you going to lead a special tour with Ernesto? Because Ernesto runs motorcycle tours these days, and he's doing very good things. He was in Vanity Fair, big profile on him this month. So, wonderful guy, has a fleet of brand new Harleys in Cuba. Cuba's changing, folks. Ernesto has a fleet of brand new Harleys in Cuba to run his motorcycle tour. So I hope one day I'll be actually working with him. But anyway, and then of course, we all love a good cigar, do we not? And so here's, thank you very much for mentioning Michael Smirkonish. So you all know Michael Smirkonish. If you don't, please watch his show on CNN on the weekends, wonderful show. He's a big cigar fan, so I took him and his family on a private tour last year, and boy, it's good to travel with somebody who can afford to buy $40 cigars. Let me tell you, I found out it's the difference, because I'm not prepared to pay $40 for a cigar as much as I like a cigar. It's the difference between driving a Chevrolet or a Rolls Royce. But anyway, the best thing of all is, all those years that I was traveling legally, I've always traveled under a general license, as I said, journalist, professional research, and these days people to people. I could never bring anything home. It was illegal. I was traveling legally, you couldn't bring anything home. And now, not only do you get to smoke your cigars in Cuba, you can legally bring home Cuban cigars. So, smoke that one, Marco. So, in terms of the practicalities, since last year, the US airlines, not just American, flying direct. It's just like booking any other ticket to any other place in the world. Before that, it was a bit of a pain in the ass, having to fly charters, very expensive charters. These days, you can fly round trip Miami, and these days, thank goodness, I can get from Air California into Havana the same day, depending on my routing. American, for example, currently has 4 or 5 flights daily out of Miami, but there are other carriers. Southwest flies out of Los Angeles, for example, and they take care of your visas. The only thing you need to do in terms of, I know you've still got in your minds the unanswered questions of, well, what is the paperwork? There is no paperwork anymore. What will happen is when you go to American Airlines website and put in that you want to fly to Havana, there will be an online pop-up, and it will have boxes in those 12 categories, and you simply check off, I'm going for humanitarian work, I'm going for religious. You're all going to put in people to people, and with that, you're done. You have affirmed legally that you are traveling for that reason, and you're done. You get your ticket and you go. That's it. All right? I would just recommend, in case Trump really decides he's going to play Marco Rubio's card, you better have your paperwork in order when you come home. We'll see. We don't know. But anyway, that's how it is. So what's the experience like when you get there? Well, it starts with the first sense of you are in a time warp in so many ways, and nothing brings it home. Nothing brings it home like the presence of all these old American cars. So hopefully you'll come tomorrow, because I'm going to give you a whole presentation of 1 hour on all these old American cars. Why are they there, and how the heck do they keep these babies running? Okay? So please come back tomorrow. And so yeah, you can travel in them. By the way, I have to say, these cars are looking better than ever. Take a little note from what I'm going to say tomorrow, because for the first time, with the new rapprochement between the two countries, the Cubans for the first time can get real car paint and real car parts, and they are catering, well, they were whilst they were coming. There's definitely been a rapid reduction in the number of Americans in the last 2 months going to Cuba. One of the other notices came from National Geographic today, telling me that half the people on one of my November tours have cancelled because of all this news. And so that's the whole purpose of what is politically motivated news about the so-called sonic attacks. It is an effort, guaranteed. It is nothing but an effort to try and kill tourism to Cuba and break the relations that exist between us. Guaranteed. So anyway, moving right along. And the second impression that you have is that, my God, I'm only 90 miles from Florida and the McDonald's malls, but you are in a totally different entity. And you are in a place that I admire on so many levels. Yes, no country in the world, including ours, has not but its great faults that need correcting. Cuba amongst them. But it is a different entity operating from a different philosophical point of view, not just a political point of view. And Rosali did a wonderful job that brought tears to my eyes about what their philosophical approach is to life. And it's demonstrative of that there is no requirement for uniformity amongst cultures and nations in this world. We honor indigenous cultures and try and preserve them. Let's give Cuba the dignity of trying to succeed in the enterprise that it's trying. But anyway, I digress. And there it all is, with all the billboards and whatnot. You are in a different world. For many, it's Alice in Wonderland, right? But it's a marvelous travel experience, and as travelers, we travel with an open mind to have this kind of engagement. And there it is. Whether you like it or not, whether it's, fatherland or death. Fidel's ultimate phrase resulted in 1960, after the first shipment of arms came to Cuba from a French ship, Le Couvre, Belgium armaments, and exploded in Havana Harbor, killing 80 people. The CIA is blamed. It probably was the CIA. That was the moment, the funeral next day, Fidel uttered the first phrase, first time, patria, fatherland, or death. So there it is. But you can't go to Cuba and not realize that the most preeminent political character is, of course, Che Guevara, who was from Argentina. Very good, educated crowd here. Yes, of course, Argentinian doctor comes up to Cuba, well, actually Mexico, meets Raul. Raul introduces him to Fidel. This is 1955-6. And he joins Fidel's rebel army in training in Mexico as the doctor, but goes on to prove himself Fidel's most capable military guerrilla commander. And then is given honorary Cuban citizenship. So, a joke. You all want a little levity thrown in? So, first joke, that Che loved to tell himself about how was it that Che Guevara was named Minister of Banking, Finance and Industry. So here's the joke. All the commandantes are sitting around the table. Fidel is apportioning the ministerial roles. And he asks for an economist. And Che puts his hand up. And Fidel says, you'll be Minister of Banking, Finance and Industry. At the end of the meeting, all the ministerial positions are apportioned. And Che goes up to Fidel and says, Fidel, well, why did you make me Minister of Banking, Finance and Industry? Well, I asked for an economist. An economist? I thought you asked for a communist. And that is so apropos, because there's no more marketable, merchandisable product in Cuba these days This is a man who firmly wanted to do away with money. Shea, as Minister of Banking, felt you could create a society so dedicated, motivated by altruism, that money would become not required. And so he's now the most marketable product. In fact, you have to look carefully. Sometimes you'll find it from teacups to inside teacups, right? So anyway, that's Che Guevara. But one of the other reasons that this is a remarkable time to visit is not just the rapprochement that we enjoyed under Obama in the last few years, that looks like now we're losing entirely, but that we are already 10 years into post-Fidel. It used to amuse me over the last few years as people would say, ooh, what's going to happen in post-Fidel when Fidel dies? Fidel essentially died in 2006 when he was taken gravely ill. All right, he never recovered. He never recovered. And as Raul, his younger brother of 5 years, took over, becoming president in 2008, his ambition, different vision, different personality. I met Fidel, I finally did get to meet him one-on-one. 2003, I've been in the presence of Raul, but never talked to him. But they're different personalities. And Raul had a different vision. He could not begin to implement his vision, which I don't agree with my friends who say Fidel supports Raul's changes. I don't believe that. His vision was reform, and it was not until 2011, when all Fidel's men in power had been replaced with Raulistas, that Raul could initiate the reforms that he had in mind. They're now retrenching a bit, partly in response to Trump's moves, but what it means is essentially, and this is critical, is the privatization. Rosalia made mention of the fact that Cubans can now freely buy and sell properties, and have multiple properties, by the way. But it means the issuing of licenses in 201 categories that includes restaurants like this, La Guarida, substantial restaurants, private nightclubs, etc. So this is the big end of the scale. A lot of people, as you saw there, repairing watches and whatnot. You can't make much of a living, but there are millionaires in Cuba accumulating bit by bit, and most importantly than millionaires, there is a middle class of private entrepreneurship that has been evolving in the last few years and accelerating rapidly in the last 2 or 3 years with the influx en masse of American tourists. And Obama understood implicitly that to permit Americans to travel freely to Cuba would endorse this experiment in private enterprise that could ostensibly, this is the back scene rationale, become a catalyst for more democratic reform in Cuba. And of course that now is in retrenchment as the Cuban government itself has stopped issuing licenses to key categories, no more restaurants, no more private room rentals. Those are the big income earners, in response to Trump's move. And of course, the Cubans themselves, I am hearing, are screaming at losing the business. Private entrepreneurs who've invested good money in these properties are now not getting the business. So anyway, enough on the heavy-duty politics. Let's have a little levity. How about the physical beauty of this place? Can you imagine this running for 300 miles unbroken? Okay? And that is the case. This is one of I took this photograph in 1996. This was on my motorcycle journey. I do have some books here to sell, and anybody who reads or has read that book will understand I'm at Cayo Sabinal here. This is my lunch coming ashore, because Cayo Sabinal to this day has no hotels. 80% of all the 4.5 million tourists who arrived last year and this year will be staying in these resorts in the all-inclusives. Remember, we're talking about mostly Canadians, Russians, big-time Russians, Europeans, etc. They're going as snowbirds to escape the winters of Siberia and whatnot. And this is where they stay, in the all-inclusives, etc., which were hammered by Hurricane Irma. Tragic story of destruction along this coast. But to this day, Cayo Sabinal, which has been slated for 13,000 hotel rooms, has none. And so this was my lunch coming ashore, and I slept in a little thatch hut. This was one of my favorite moments. And then you get these remarkable mountains and valleys, and this is Vinales, quintessential Cuban terrain, the most beautiful of the Cuban landscapes, to my mind. Also happens to be tobacco country. This is where the best tobacco in the world, going into the best cigar factories, is grown on private farms. Mostly private farms, tilled in traditional ways that take you back yet one more century in time in terms of your personal experience and your sense of a temps perdu, a place lost in time. And of course, speaking of that, when you're in Havana, doesn't have to be Havana, but that's where I'd recommend, de rigueur. You've got to go to the cigar factories. It's like going to Paris without smoking the wine, or you've got to do that. It's a lot of fun, and here's my friend Grisela, who is one of the lectores maintaining tradition that's been maintained since the 19th century of reading to the rollers as they write. So back in the 19th century, the rollers were considered amongst the most educated of Cubans because they were being read to. There is a reason the Monte Cristo cigar exists, the Count of Monte Cristo. There is a reason the Romeo and Juliet cigar exists. These folks were being read Shakespeare. Their tastes are a little more eclectic these days. I haven't ever heard Shakespeare being read, but yeah, and this is Grisela reading from The Old Man and the Sea. This is part of David Soul and I's filming for the Hemingway car restoration. We had a reading 20 times the same paragraph. I had to get up and tell a joke to the workers on the microphone in the factory as my compensation to them for having to listen to the same paragraph over and over. It was not a politically... You know how your mind gets trapped and you can only think of one joke? It was a politically insensitive joke. Sorry, Rosalia. But anyway, I won't tell it here. And then you get the colonial backdrop. Right, you can't escape that. You go to the cities. 7 or 6 UNESCO World Heritage Sites as historic city centers in Cuba. And here is, we are in Santiago de Cuba, atop the castle, one of 2 candidazo ceremonies, one in Havana, one in Santiago, where literally they do real military figures serving their national service time, dress in period costume. In Santiago it is of the independence Mambi fighters. In Havana they dress in Spanish military costume. And this is real black powder they're using in a cannon. At sunset, and so that's fun to experience that. And when it comes to the colonial aspect, there's no greater place to visit than Trinidad. Becoming overrun with tourists, by the way, now. Amazing change in the last few years, but pickled in aspic, preserved in its core as it was in the 18th, 19th century, cobbled and still living, although probably 80% of the people here now exist off tourism with the private room rentals, etc., private restaurants, all the souvenirs that go along with that. Nonetheless, a beautiful, beautiful place to visit and have a feel for the real Cuba. And of course, in terms of the colonial ambience, Old Havana really is an astounding example of 2 things. Firstly, the legacy, thank you, the legacy of Spanish colonial power in the Americas at that time, the wealth, but also much owed to a man called Eusebio Leal Spengler, the city historian, ill right now. I wish him well, very ill man, but he was at the behest of the Restoration. Can you imagine, in 1959, the Cuban Revolution inherited a very derelict city that Batista had planned to level in entirety. The colonial city was to be leveled and redeveloped in 1950s modernist style, and they were saved. That was saved by the revolution. This derelict city, much of it still derelict and to be restored, was there to be restored. And Eusebio Leal Spengler has done a superb job of doing that. Much of Havana is indeed in very, very bad shape. I won't go into some of the reasons for that beyond the obvious ones, that it's trapped in time, there's been no redevelopment. These buildings would have been pulled down had there been no revolution. It would all be contemporary stuff. So they're there to be saved still. Anyway, but despite so many hardships in their lifestyle, the most remarkable thing about Cubans is their spirit of community, and their spirit as individuals they understand what it's like to be able to enjoy life without material wealth. And it really, the longer you spend in Cuba, the more it drives home to you how money really counts for nothing in the essence of the quality of your lifestyle. It counts for a lot, we understand. If you want to have your Tesla, you've got to have money, right? And we do hope that there's a lot more economic development and a lot more economic reform in Cuba. But nonetheless, they demonstrate such a warmth of spirit and love of life because they have strong family, they have strong community, and they have essential values, right? It's not about the land of the individual, we know that, better or worse, but in this case, for the better. And it's one of the great rewards you get from traveling to Cuba, to engage with Cubans. This is what the health education, the sharing, is all about, that spirit. And I've had a lot of engagements with Cuban medics, and the one thing that always brought home to me, it comes from they're driven by that humanistic passion of doing good. So anyway, and the kids, you don't see vandalism in Cuba, for God's sake. You see kids playing chess. Every community has a Casa de Ajedrez, right, a chess house. And you see, oh my God, wicked communist country. Oh, for God's sake, give it up. They still retain beautiful traditions. The tradition of the Fiesta de Quince, the 15th birthday, the most important day in her life, other than the day she gets married or gives birth. And they have reverence for this throughout Cuba. And the state has done a marvelous job in retaining the musical traditions. Every community has a Casa de la Trova, and a good percentage of the Cuban people are very into their ballet, into the classical music, etc., which is projected to the entire country through the TV and radio networks. So that even the country folks, relatively, in a small sense, different scale of education to some degree, but still appreciative of the classics, the classical music, etc. And of course, no place on earth like it for salsa and other musical forms. So Cuba sets the world beat in many ways, culturally. And yes, there was severe repression of religious expression for many, many years. I don't want to gloss over the negatives of Cuba, but that is history. And the greater percentage of Cubans these days are believers of some kind, but not Catholicism. Catholicism takes second place to Santeria in the background. Let me back up. The woman in the background, all in white, will have been, this is the La Merced church in Havana Vieja. So she would have been praying to the Catholic Virgin, and then will go out and pray, more importantly, to her Santeria saint, the African alter ego, because Santeria, the most important religion in Cuba, is a syncretic religion of Catholicism and the African Yoruba religion. So you have your shrines in your house, and this is so fitting to the Cuban personality, because unlike the virginal prim and proper Catholic saints, who wants to be like that? Isn't it far better to dance, fornicate, enjoy some rum and cigars, as the Cuban Orishas do, which gives Cubans the license to be themselves, and has helped shape Cuban culture much more profoundly than has Catholicism. Now, this is interesting. You can't ever escape politics in Cuba, and so even in Santeria, it is said, I have nothing to back this up, that believers in Santeria are more inclined to be supportive of the revolution than others. Who knows? And they say, oh, well, that's because Fidel himself was endorsed by the Santeria Orishas, the God-saint figures. And they look to the black and red of Fidel's 20th of July revolutionary movement, because they are the colors of El Iguá, the Orisha that is the opens the pathway ahead, preordains your future. And so that seems to suggest that this was propitious. And then, of course, that very, very famous day, 7th of January 1959, Fidel arrives after the fall of Batista, after passing a week to get from Santiago de Cuba to Havana, televised to the nation the first speech in Havana from Camp Colombia, and 3 white doves descend at night on at his desk. One lands on his shoulder. Can you imagine the gasp in the crowd? What the doves represent in Catholicism, of course, they're the symbol of peace, but in Santeria they go beyond that, right? They are the symbol of Obatala, right? Bringer of justice as well as peace, etc. And my God, you can imagine the gasp in the crowd. And Lee Lockwood, an American journalist present, said that it turned cynics into believers and believers into fanatics. You got a video on YouTube, you can all do it. You will find the guy who releases them below the desk, and actually he defected later and told the story of training them for a week. He claims that Fidel was not in on it, but I don't actually buy that. So anyway, and of course, it's easy with all the news that comes out of Washington, a unipolar perspective on Cuba, to forget how many people like Rosalia are fully supportive of the revolution that they were born into and have lived through, coming from a different philosophical dimension than ourselves. And these are the reasons. Rosalia hinted at the racial component of society back then. We had Jim Crow laws in the States back then. They had Jim Crow laws in Cuba. You had a vast black underclass. This was the class that wasn't served by education, was not served by medical facilities, that now is, right? You saw those black doctors going off to treat Ebola in Africa. And so this is one of their accomplishments that often is unstated, the racial harmonies that are now in retreat, because last year, folks, more than $3 billion flowed out of Florida to Cuba. White money from the 50s families who left after the revolution, coming back into Cuba, being invested in businesses that are exclusively white. The reason that Obama chose to dine at my friend Carlos's restaurant in Havana, the only restaurant he dined at, because Carlos is the only black man owning a successful Paladar private restaurant in Havana. Then you have the health clinics. I won't say any more. There's, other than the one component that Rosalia didn't speak to much, was that in the preventive medicine scheme, your family doctor lives in the community and makes regular visits every month, and that every workplace has a doctor, so they know. They follow you from the get-go. If you have got high blood pressure, they know it at that time and can do something about it. And then, of course, the Great Literacy Campaign. I don't know, I think I've got 5 minutes left. Can I go on 5 minutes?
Sure, I recognize Jorge.
That was Jorge, yes, this is family to me, this is Jorge. Did you stay with Jorge?
Yeah.
Yes, you did, right? Yeah, okay, she got that from... This is my family, my brother, he's not a friend, he's my brother Jorge. I just happened to be there when the family doctor visited to check up on them. And then the Great Literacy Campaign. So look at the figures up there. 24% illiteracy and 44%, was it 44 or 46? 44% of kids not enrolled in school. This is what the revolution inherited. This is unacceptable. Cuba is an underdeveloped nation. I didn't put the slide in. I could show you compared to other nations. Stop comparing Cuba to America. You need to compare it to its peers in the Caribbean and Mexico and Central America. And in that regard, what they have done is astounding. They've dropped down from 100%, one of only 11 nations in the world. Now it's 99.98% according to UNESCO. But what an accomplishment. Applause for what they've done in Cuba in that regard. So, it's the first time I've given this show, and I know I've already run an hour. So are we good? Are we good? Okay.
I think I'm fascinated.
All right. So, let's backtrack to the end of the 19th century. Cuba had been served after the slave, gold, money, etc. Post-slavery was already then the world's largest sugar producer, and it is to sugar that it owes its relationship as a colony to 3 great imperial nations. Of course, Spain for 400 years, then the America, it was a colony in all but name of America, 1898 to 1959, and then of course the Soviet Union, where they were essentially trading sugar to feed the Soviet bear, and Khrushchev and co. gave Fidel everything he wanted in exchange. But back in the late 19th century,